All right, well, I'm sure there'll probably be a few more people popping in, but Jason, if you want to go ahead and get started, um, yeah, great.
Okay, I'm free to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, sounds good. Welcome, everybody. I appreciate you joining me today so that we can talk a little bit about what's happening in regard to government relief assistance, PPP program, the EIDL program, which is the EIDL, and then I can answer any questions that you guys might have. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Give me 1 second here. All
Jake,
right. So what?
Can I ask? Oh, never mind. You just answered my question. Where you're from?
All right. There we go. Sorry. And we can certainly send out this slide to anybody that needs it. There are links in here that will be very, very helpful to following up on what we're going to talk about today. So again, my first name is Jason. I am a CPA here in town. We have a firm over on Sahara and Buffalo, kind of close to the Village Square office of Keller Williams. And so here's my contact information. By all means, feel free to reach out if you have any questions or concerns. But what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about the SBA disaster relief, all due to, well, terms we've become very familiar with, COVID-19. Couple disclaimers. What I'm going to talk about today is current as of July 23rd. The reason I say that is the government is changing rules all of the time. In fact, over the last week, just on Monday, we got a bunch more new rules. I didn't think we needed to update the slides I was talking about today for those rules. But yeah, they're still evolving and still changing even while we're in the middle of this. So just be aware that a lot of what I'm about to say could very well change by next week. Another thing that we have to realize is you're going to read a lot of stuff online trying to educate yourself, and you may actually go to the law itself, the CARES Act, where it talks about setting up the PPP program and the EIDL programs, and you're going to start finding that the actual language in the law is contradictory to what the SBA has come out to say. And so there's all this conflicting language and all these conflicting rules. But what the SBA has said, yeah, we know what Congress has said in the law, but we don't really care. It's our rules. This is our program. We are going to do things the way we want. So even though the law may say one thing, we have to follow the SBA rules with whatever they say on this. Now, to add another layer of complexity to this, the PPP program, which if any of you don't already know, stands for the Paycheck Protection Program, is administered by our local banks or by an online lender, wherever you went and applied for a PPP loan from. So yes, we have the language of the law. Then we have the SBA that has said, hey, this is how we're going to run it. But then even on top of that, this is administered by the banks. And so it's quite possible the bank itself will have wanted you to supply documents that you may feel is not necessary. But if the bank is the one that is going to give the final decision, whether you get the loan or get forgiveness or don't get forgiveness, we got to play by the rules of the bank. So if the bank says we need certain documentation or we need to do things a certain way, we've got to follow whatever the bank says. So just a couple caveats that I wanted to go through here. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about some of the recent developments and what's happening with these two programs. We'll specifically talk about the PPP program and then the EIDL program. So some recent developments. For those of you that would have or maybe got a PPP loan early on in the process, this would have been in mid to late April, or I'm sorry, early to mid April. If you got a PPP loan back then, it was your understanding that you had to use all of the proceeds within 8 weeks. Well, that has now been extended to 24 weeks. There are several reasons why that matters. Just know that the 24-week period does make it more likely that you as a realtor will be forgiven virtually all of the PPP loan. The way the rules were originally written with an 8-week period, there was a small slice of about 2 weeks that would not have been forgiven. Just the way the calculation of the forgiveness worked, it resulted in a lot of realtors not qualifying for full forgiveness. It is the government's intention that the entire PPP loan will be forgiven. So, the government is trying to help us and trying to work with us to make sure that all of us qualify for the maximum amount of forgiveness on the PPP funds that we received. The second bullet point is no longer valid, but I do want to say, so the PPP program initially closed as of the end of June. They reopened it through August 8th. However, that has now closed. We are waiting currently for some sort of final stimulus from Congress with regards to, are they going to reopen the PPP program? There is a lot of desire to do that. They do want to fund more money, but I don't know if Congress can come to some agreement between the two sides, whether that'll happen or not. There is talk that if you did not already get PPP money, there is talk that it is potentially going to come back, but right now we don't have any details. A couple other changes. There are still several unanswered questions. There is out there a proposal to make all PPP loans of $150,000 or less automatically be forgiven, which means that if you did get PPP money, then as long as your loan was less than $150,000, you're going to have a pretty easy time getting it forgiven. It's just going to be a blanket forgiveness. For those of you that did have a loan less than 150, it is expected that there'll be some sort of filing that we have to do, probably some certifications that we have to give to the government that, yeah, hey, we did need the money, yeah, we used it appropriately, and those types of things, but we won't have to go through this big, long, convoluted calculation in order to prove that we used the money correctly. So we're keeping our fingers crossed on that one for sure, that Congress will come to an agreement that some level of PPP loan will be forgiven. It may be less than 150. It could get scaled back to, say, 75,000 or even 100,000, but that would still help a lot of people if they did things like that. And then there is a proposal right now to make all of the deductions that we spent the PPP money on, that they will be valid tax deductions. Right now, anything that you've spent the PPP money on is not currently considered tax deductible. So there is a proposal out there to make the money that you spent PPP money on, the things you spent the PPP money on, I should say, will be considered tax deductible. So those are some of the things that are out there. The last bullet point here is there really is absolutely no rush to try to apply for forgiveness. I have a lot of clients coming to me saying, hey, I want to file my application. I want to get this monkey off my back. I want to be done with it and move on. And I have to say, just hold tight, be patient. If you apply right now, you have to go under some of the older rules and you may not get 100% forgiveness. If we wait for the full 24-week period to lapse, and if we wait for the additional guidance from Congress, it's more likely that we are going to get forgiveness. Another reason there is no rush to apply for the forgiveness is we have 10 months from the date we got, 10 months from the closing of our 24-week testing period to apply for the forgiveness. So let's do a quick example. If we first applied and got PPP money at the end of, or even the beginning of April, we would count 24 weeks from the beginning of April, which would be September 15th. And then from September 15th, we have 10 months in order to submit our PPP forgiveness application. So there really is no rush to submit any of this. We do not have to make a payment during that 10-month waiting period. So really, if we do September, October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May, June, we have all the way until July 15th of next year before we have to make a payment and before we really have to submit our application for forgiveness on this loan. So just be patient while we do wait for the additional rules to come out. All right, so how does currently the PPP forgiveness process work? Well, how do we apply for the forgiveness? We have to go back to the very same lender from which we got the money. So if you got the money from Bank of America or Chase Bank or Wells Fargo, you have to go back to them and ask them, hey, Bank of America, hey, Wells Fargo, how do you want me to submit our forgiveness application? Many of the larger banks are coming up with their own online portal system where you will submit all of the documentation to apply for forgiveness. And again, even if there is blanket forgiveness, like I just mentioned, it is anticipated there will be some sort of certification filing with the bank you're going to have to do in order to just at least attest or say that you use the money correctly. How do we go about applying for this? Well, to apply for forgiveness, the SBA has come up with a Form 3508 or a Form 3508 EZ. EZ meaning, hey, it's an easy form. And I use that term tongue in cheek because it's really not that much easier than the real form. There is a link here that we could send out to the actual form on the SBA website. When you go look at this form, it's going to make your head spin. It's 11 pages. It's out of control crazy. It's even confusing for someone like me who's in the trenches doing this. So this application itself is quite onerous. It's quite difficult. Just be prepared that you may need some help if we have to go through this full application process. So when do we apply for PPP forgiveness? Again, we apply 24 weeks after we got the money. So if we got the money April 1st, you count 24 weeks from that point, and that is when you are now eligible to submit your forgiveness application. I have heard of some banks accepting applications, but for the most part, I haven't really heard of mass forgiveness applications being submitted at the moment. So if your bank is accepting applications, you can submit the application, but just realize you have to use the old rules, and it could possibly happen where some of the new rules that we're waiting on are going to be a lot easier to comply with. If you don't want to wait for the 24-week period here, the next bullet point down is yes, you can choose an 8-week period in which to use that money if you wanted to. Again, you have to submit your forgiveness application no later than 10 months after the 24-week period ends. There is no rush to forgiveness. And again, the last bullet point, banks that I know largely are not accepting PPP forgiveness applications at the moment. All right, so what documents are we going to need in order to substantiate or prove to the government that we used the PPP money as they intended? And so here, if you have payroll reports, so if you are an S corporation and you are issuing yourself an actual paycheck or a W-2 at the end of the year, you will need payroll reports. So right here, the first bullet point is payroll reports. You're going to need your quarterly payroll returns, your Form 941, and your state of Nevada unemployment reports for the first, second, and third quarters of 2020. Then if you're using on top of your payroll, we can use other costs to get forgiveness. Those would include health insurance, utilities, mortgage, rent, and automobile expenses. So you will need actual copies of these bills in order to send to the bank, which means you're going to need copies of invoices, copies of canceled checks, and you're going to need this for the period February through September, so every month. So you may want to start gathering some of these documents now so that you have them available once you are ready to apply for forgiveness. Utilities. A lot of people have asked me what constitutes utilities at the moment. And so right now the SBA has said electricity, water, gas, telephone, and internet qualifies for utilities. Now, transportation is another cost that is included in the forgiveness. Right now, it's our understanding that will include your automobile to the extent that you have used it for business. So that means you need to keep track of all of your expenses for your automobile, and you have to keep track of your mileage log. So for those of you that have not been keeping a mileage log, if you plan to use automobile expenses in order to obtain PPP forgiveness, then we may have to supply an automobile log to the bank. So you're going to have to pull that together, start gathering that so that we can prove that we had legit expenses. And then we have to show receipts for gas and, again, the mileage log that I mentioned. So some of you may have received what was called an EIDL advance, an EIDL advance, or an EIDL grant. Back in the beginning, when all of this was going down, the SBA initially rolled out their EIDL program, their EIDL program, and you were allowed to go and apply for an immediate infusion of $10,000. If you received that grant or that immediate infusion of $10,000, you do not have to pay that back. However, whatever EIDL grant that you received will reduce the amount of PPP forgiveness you receive. So it's the government's backdoor way of saying, hey, while we're not going to go force you to pay back that EIDL grant that you received, and that grant was up to $10,000. So you could have received anywhere from $1,000 all the way up to $10,000. And you may need to go back and look at your bank account to see if you received that. But if you receive this EIDL grant, it's going to reduce the amount of PPP forgiveness you receive, and then effectively at the end of the day, you will be left with a PPP loan in the exact amount of that EIDL grant that you received. So that will kind of end up having to be paid back in a roundabout sort of way. All right, so let's move on now and let's talk about the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, or the EIDL loan program. So there for a while, the SBA had opened the EIDL program to everybody. They're kind of in the beginning of summer for May and June. The SBA closed it and said, hey, we're only going to do it for farmers, but now it's back open for everybody. So if you did not receive any money for PPP, then you can still go and apply for an EIDL loan. This is a loan. Everybody should realize this is a loan. This will have to be paid back. There is no forgiveness possibility on this EIDL piece. But with that said, you can possibly get a loan of up to $150,000. Now, a lot of people are saying, oh, that sounds good. I'm just going to go get an EIDL loan. I'll pay down my car, pay off my house. This is on a much lower interest rate. Everything will be good. No, 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 no. Please do not do that. The EIDL money must be used for ongoing business operations. The law specifically states that you are not allowed to use that money to refinance other debt. You can use this EIDL money to pay the monthly payments on your existing business debt, but you cannot use it to go refinance your house, refinance your car, pay off your car, anything like that. You will get into trouble with the government if you do that. And there are stiff penalties and fines if you get caught. Now, what are the terms of an EIDL loan? An EIDL loan is for 30 years. It's fixed at 3.75%, and there are no payments for the first 12 months. So if you received an EIDL loan now, as of today, your first payment would not be due until a year from now. So the terms on this loan are pretty good in terms of business lending. For any of you that may have looked into business lending, a bank is going to charge a heck of a lot more than this 3.75%. So this interest rate is quite good. The third bullet point up here from the bottom, if you by chance applied for an EIDL loan prior to April 3rd, you can still get an EIDL loan and a PPP loan. If that did not apply to you and you're just now applying for the EIDL, you have to choose between, hey, am I going to get EIDL money or PPP money? You can't do both. You cannot participate in both programs. If you are interested in applying for an EIDL loan, that is done directly with the SBA. It's not done through a bank. You have to go to the SBA website to apply for this. There is a link down here, the second bullet point up. It's at sba.gov/disaster, and you submit your application directly with the SBA, and then the SBA would communicate directly with you via email in order to get you that money. If you are an S corporation or a small business, or even if you're just a sole proprietor, if you're a realtor operating as a sole proprietor, you will qualify to receive an EIDL loan if you so choose. You would just designate that on your application when you submit it to the SBA. All right, so in conclusion, just realize that, hey, resources right now are really thin. We're trying to answer everybody's questions. Banking resources are thin, accounting, legal. We're trying to do the best we can and answer everybody's questions, but please be patient. If you email us with questions, it might take us a day or a little bit longer to get back to, but we are trying as best as we can to help everybody out. Also realize that government rules are changing on the fly. Some answers may not be available. I've never had to say, I don't know, more so than I have the last few months. That's just because sometimes the answers are not available and are not out there for us to give. So again, here is my contact information. If any of you have questions or comments or concerns, I'm happy to help. I will hang on the line for a little bit. I'll monitor the chat and we'll kind of start from there. All right, that's the end of my presentation. I took up close to 25 minutes. Does anybody have any questions they're wanting to ask, or they can put there in the chat box? Yes, Gail, I'm sorry. In saying realtor, realtor.
Sorry, it just drives me crazy.
Well, sometimes I try to enunciate so that I make sure people understand every word I'm saying, but I appreciate that.
Is there any talk, because this seems to be going on and on and on. Is there any talk about the possibility of a second round of PPP being offered for those who already have PPP? Because I was instructed that it was there was different instruction way back then as far as how much you could receive or couldn't receive. So I got the lesser of what I was hoping for based upon what I was hearing. But are they going to reissue or make this available again?
So if you could see my screen again, I kind of highlighted, there is a proposal to have an additional 90 billion funded into a second round of PPP. However, if you received money under the first round of PPP, in order to qualify, to receive money in this upcoming second round, you're going to have to prove additional hardship or why you need the money. So it's our understanding that if you do end up applying under this second round, when and if it happens, there will be additional hurdles that you're going to have to prove that, hey, I really need this additional money. And so, but yes, it's my understanding there will be an additional round coming.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments, concerns?
And you said, I'm just going to clarify, you said for us to not jump at doing anything about the forgiveness, that we have no later than 10 months from when we received our funds,
It's
correct?
so let's do an example for you. When did you receive your funds?
I don't recall, but let's say that the loan was funded, or whatever we call it, it was funded on a certain date. So is it from the funding date to 10 months?
No, so it is, let me, give you 1 second.
I'll pull mine because I can tell you for
So
sure.
as an example, if you received money on April 1st, then the end of our 24-week testing period ends September 16th. Then you have 10 months from September 16th in order to apply for forgiveness. So most people right now are still within their 24-week testing period, which means they cannot or they should not even apply right now. So come September 16th, that starts our 10-week testing period, our 10-week waiting period in order to apply 10 months. I'm low. That starts our 10-month period in which we can apply for the forgiveness.
So I'm looking at my paperwork. The loan date, which I'm assuming is also the funding date, was May 11th.
Yeah, so count 24 weeks from May 11th, and that is the first possible day you can apply for the forgiveness. And then from whatever date that is, that's going to probably be October-ish at some point.
Uh-huh.
Then from October, we'll just say October 15th, then you have 10 months in order to submit that application.
So we've got time, and basically you're saying hold out because the rules are changing and it will apply to whatever the rules are at the time.
Correct. So if you apply right now, you're going to have to prove every last expense that I just mentioned to you. What we are hoping is that Congress gets their act together and says, hey, we're going to give automatic forgiveness to everybody with a PPP loan of less than $150,000. If they do that, that's going to greatly simplify my life.
Yeah.
Your life. So that's really the hope here, is they're going to set that bar high enough that it captures the vast majority of taxpayers and the vast majority of PPP loans.
That makes sense. It makes it a lot easier. Okay, so I'm not going to worry about it until later.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're still in a holding pattern.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
If we think of questions later, is there a way for us to reach out?
You can certainly email me. I will put my email here in the chat. I did have it on the slides, but my email is just my first name, Jason, at the letter P, the number 2, CPA.com. So it's Jason at P2CPA.com.
And then would you also type in your phone numbers, because it's easier, we can just copy paste.
And there's my phone number, which is 702-233-9526. We will ask that you email us first before just calling. We're trying to field so many calls that we're kind of funneling everything through email. And then if it needs a larger explanation, we could certainly get on the phone at that point. But we found for the vast majority of questions, email works pretty good early on.
So my question is, you had put out a list of things that we needed to justify it with. Is our payroll enough to justify it? Because when I got the loan, I got approved for one without my expenses, and then I got approved for another one with my expenses, and Wells Fargo grabbed mine. And so I got the lesser amount. And it had already taken into consideration my write-offs, which.
So what we have to consider is the application for the loan was one process, and that used one set of rules. The application for forgiveness is another separate process, and that uses a whole separate set of rules. And so a lot of times those rules do not match. And that was the whole problem here, is the loan amount was based off of payroll only, whereas forgiveness is based off of payroll and other things. And that's why the two do not line up exactly. So it is possible that you could get full forgiveness just with payroll, but if that doesn't work for whatever reason, then we can go look at and say, hey, do you have some of these other expenses that we can use to qualify to get full forgiveness on the money we got?
Okay. Thank you.
But hopefully all of us on this call are below the threshold, and we will hopefully get automatic forgiveness.
And will you have another training when it comes time that they figure all this out?
I will certainly send a blast email out to everybody. If you put your email in the chat, I can make sure you're added to our email list. That way, when I send out blast emails on updates to these programs, you are included on those emails. I don't know if you guys already received my monthly newsletter. If you do, you're on our email list. But if not, if you send me your email, I'll add you to that list so that you can make sure to be informed when these things happen.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments, concerns? All right. Well, I think we're good to go, unless there's anything else.
No, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Yeah,
All right,
thank you.
thank you guys. I appreciate you letting me talk today. Have a good
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.